My name is David Thornell, and since my retirement 18 years ago, I've been researching my Thornell ancestors back 400 years to my 10th great-grandfather. He was Edward Thorndell, and he married Anne Scarlock on 14 January 1599 in the Winchcombe Parish Church in the Cotswolds country of Gloucestershire, England. Over those 400 years, the Thorndell surname has also morphed into Thornell, Thornwell, Thornhill, Thorndill, Thorndale, and expanded into America and Australia. In a series of videos, I will attempt to describe the life and times of each generation of my own Thornell direct lineage, and do the same for those other Thornell surname variants that branched from it. At present, the family tree contains about 2,500 names, all thoroughly researched, sourced, and documented. If you think you are a member of this tree, contact me and I will send you free of charge a copy of your own direct line ancestry back to Edward and Anne.
Edwin Thornell was born in Frampton Cotterell in 1812 and married Sarah Beza in St. James Church, Bristol in 1835. He had 8 sons and 3 daughters, and they all settled around him in their lives in Frampton Cotterell, except for John Charles, who emigrated to Massachusetts in the USA and raised his own family there. In addition to his house in Frampton Cotterell, he also had a cottage and a garden in the adjoining community of Brockridge. He made his living as a coal merchant and hauler, who used donkeys to carry coal to Stroud, Dursley, and Thornbury, towns which were about 15 miles north of where he lived. The coal was cut from coal mines at nearby Coalpit Heath, where other Thornells were employed as coal miners. In 1840, an adult coal miner earned 20 shillings a week, and boys under 13 earned 4 shillings a week. The Factory Act of 1833 limited 8 and 9-year-old children to work 8 hours per day. Children between the ages of 14 to 18 were allowed to work 12-hour workdays. In 1842, the Mines Act barred employees from hiring any women or girls or boys who were under the age of 13 from mining work. Edwin's life spanned a period of significant change in transportation, from the first steam locomotives at his birth to the first motor cars at his death. He was 19 when Charles Darwin began his famous voyage in the HMS Beagle, 42 at the time of the charge of the Light Brigade, 59 when Stanley uttered his famous words, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume," in Central Africa, and 76 at the time of Jack the Ripper's murders in London. James was born in Frampton Cotterell in 1839 and married Harriet Palser in 1861. Family tradition has it that Harriet had only one arm, and in the 1861 census there's a note that says she was, quote, "incapable of employment," unquote. Family tradition also claims that she was a school teacher at one time in her life. Harriet died in 1892. Like his parents, James had a large family, 5 sons and 6 daughters. He was a coal miner who later in life became a market gardener. A market gardener is someone who grows fruits and vegetables in a large garden and sells them in the local market. This map of Frampton Cotterell shows the location of James' home and that of his father Edwin, as well as other homes and farmland owned or rented by other Thornell cousins. Edwin's home no longer exists, but James's does. The farmland that the Thornells worked has been built over in the last 100 years, but in some locations the original buildings still remain. James was 19 years old when Charles Darwin published his theory of evolution. He died in 1912, the same year the liner Titanic set out on a maiden voyage. James is buried in the Frampton Cotterell churchyard. Edwin Thornell was born in Frampton Cotterell in 1867, married Amelia Powell in South Wales in 1892, and died in Shirley, Warwickshire, England in 1944. They had 7 sons and 2 daughters. Edwin moved from Frampton Cotterell to the Rhondda Valley in South Wales sometime between 1881 and 1891 and worked his whole life as a coal miner. His experience as a young single man in the Rhondda was probably quite similar to another who wrote,
"Of course I was in lodgings at first. There was 5 of us in the same lodgings. There were beds in nearly every room, and often we were sleeping in the beds during the night, and the night men in the same beds by day. In the morning, when dressing together to work, we'd find it difficult to put our own hands on our clothes. I've gone to work many a time, wearing another lodger's stockings and boots of a different pair, but we were earning good money, and although we never saw daylight in the winter until Saturday, we were a jolly crowd, and enjoyed life in the good old Rhondda."
While still a young man, he emigrated with other miners from Triallo to the hard coal region around Carbondale in Pennsylvania, USA. There the skills he had learned in the Rhondda were greatly in demand, but he soon grew tired and homesick and returned to Wales to settle down. Coal mining was a tough life. Housing was substandard and crowded, and ill health was common. But the social life was vibrant due to the many nonconformist chapels, societies, pubs and clubs that were there. Beginning around the turn of the century, industrial conflict and class bitterness began to emerge. The 10 months coal miners' strike in 1911 were particularly hard times for Edwin and his family. Winston Churchill authorized the use of troops and police against the striking miners, and there followed 2 days of fierce clashes before order was restored. From then on through the Great Depression, coal miner strikes, lockouts, civil unrest, and socialist fervor seemed to characterize the life of the valley. In 1912, Edwin was working underground in the coal mine with his son Walter, who was 14 years old. Edwin felt that the ceiling of the area that they were working in needed to be propped up more, and told Wally to go back and get more timber to prop it up. Wally didn't think it needed more wood, so Edwin said, "Okay, I'll get it myself." While he was gone, the ceiling fell in and Wally was crushed to death. Wally subsequently appeared to his mother Amelia in a vision, and for several years afterwards, Edwin and Amelia became active in the spiritualism movement. Just as Edwin left Gloucestershire as a young boy to find work in the Rhondda, so did another who wrote,
"In April 1890, as a boy of 13, I left Gloucestershire and went to Pennycraig in the Rhondda. I can vividly remember my amazement at what I saw. There I was, a little country boy used to the quiet village and the friendly sounds of the farm. It was almost with terror that I saw the coke ovens at Pontypridd and the dust and noise of the GWR colliery. That night in Pennycraig, I couldn't sleep, listening to the noise of the coal trains passing down the valley. I have worked underground ever since. I married a Welsh girl and settled down here for life. I didn't go back to my native place in Gloucestershire until 1919. I went to see the cottage where I was brought up and the farm where I worked, but I've never wanted to go back to live there. Once we settled in the Rhondda, our family never wanted to go back to live in the country."
Between 1921 and 1940, over 400,000 people left Wales for better employment elsewhere. One group of the Thorndells left the Rhondda for British Columbia and Canada. Edwin and his family became part of the migration in the late 1930s as they moved to the area south of Birmingham. I can vaguely remember my grandpa and grandma Thornell living down the street from us. They died a few months apart in 1944. Frederick was born in the Rhondda Valley in South Wales in 1908, married Myrtle Idina Tudball in 1934 in Slough in the county of Buckinghamshire, England, and died in 1991 in Salt Lake City, Utah, in the United States. Fred went to work with his father in the Rhondda Valley coal mines at age 14, and then ran away to London a short time later. He soon became homesick and returned home after a week. When the coal miners went on strike in 1926, he walked to London and worked there as a waiter before sailing for South Africa, where he worked for the post office in Cape Town and subsequently in the mines in Kimberley. He then returned from the Rhondda in 1934 and married Myrtle. They lived in Shirley, a small town south of Birmingham in England. They raised 2 sons, David Valentine, myself, born in 1935, and my brother Peter Grenville, born in 1939 and died in 1993. During World War II, Fred served in the Home Guard. Upon Myrtle's death in 1952, he and his 2 sons immigrated to Salt Lake City in the USA, where his brothers Arthur and Cyril had preceded him. There he married his second wife, Jean Fraser Ross, in 1959. Dad worked as a power station operator for Utah Power and Light, and Jean worked as a nurse at Shriners Hospital. After retirement, they lived in their mobile home and traveled extensively. There's a statue in front of the National Archives building in Washington, D.C., and on the base of that statue is carved the words, "Past is prologue."
If you think you are a member of this tree, contact me and I will send you free of charge a copy of your own direct line ancestry back to Edward and Anne.